Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
So, last week I was talking about bat flu, and recently it's been confirmed that coronavirus has genetic markers that are associated with snakes. So, yeah, minor correction, but I still want to talk about this because this is insane. People are dropping like flies. I've seen pictures of people walking around in biohazard suits.
Yeah.
You know, the craziest part about it is there's like this level of fashion sophistication that is, I think it's being lost on the West. I saw this group of people who were shopping, and they were carrying around like Louis Vuitton bags, and one of them was wearing a purple biohazard suit, and one had a red biohazard suit, and one had a green biohazard suit, and the purple one had this purple upside down triangle antenna looking thing. The red one had a freaking circle on top of its head. The green one just a straight up a point. They were dressed up like Teletubbies. I'm willing to concede, this could be a really good Photoshop, but it was also a picture of people walking downtown, like in a shopping district.
I mean, at the same time, I think when you're in that situation, many times you have to find humor. So that it's very possible it wasn't a Photoshop because there's like teenagers there. So the teenagers are like, fuck it, I'm going to the mall, dressing up like a Teletubby, but I'm not going to get coronavirus today. So there's so much about it that I always wonder when this type of stuff happens, how much of it is due to racism, because we have shit like that in America to a certain degree where, there was like a super herpes virus that broke out.
Well, 100,000 people or so have died from opioids in the last year or something like that.
Right.
And just within this flu season, 1,500 people have died. Yeah. And so far, the death toll from coronavirus is not as high, and it's really been limited to people over 60.
Right, and and when that shit happens, when you look at the numbers and you break down who's dying and what it is, like 1 out of 8 people that get affected, and then you find out those 1 out of 8 are old people that might have died from the flu anyway, then it's like, how much of this is media racism?
Yeah.
Just trying to make us scared of the Chinese virus.
Well, there are reports of, unconfirmed reports of coronavirus in the United States.
Right.
So I think it's fair to assume that people travel.
Of course.
And
well, those people traveled before they put the quarantine down, but on top of that, are the ones that have the confirmed reports going to die? I doubt it. And it depends on their age, and it's one of these things where the media will use all of the aspects of the story that make people, I saw people who I had seen plan their trips to China for over a year cancel their fucking trip because of this, and they weren't going to Wuhan. They were going to Beijing or some shit like that. They're not going to the entire country because this one city has a problem. So that's where I'm like, how much of this is a concerted media effort to impact Chinese tourism, to make Chinese shit look polluted and dirty? Because, I don't know if y'all remember ATL Orgy. It's like, people should be scared, just as scared to fucking travel to Atlanta and might catch some shit. If you're scared of catching fucking snake flu, fucking stay out of Atlanta too, because this motherfucker's out there trying to have orgies and spreading who knows what kind of super herpes and super fucking syphilis in America.
Well, about I think it was 10 or 15 years ago, there were STD clubs popping up in the Bay Area.
Oh my God. Like, oh, you got herpes? It's okay. You can come fuck here.
I think the implication was that there were people who were collectors.
Oh my God.
Like
I'm not surprised.
That's our deep dark internet for the day, folks. That's
Like, wow.
that's as nasty as it's gonna get. I promise. We've got a special guest today. He's been a friend of mine for a long time. In many ways, he is one of my spiritual advisors, and we're really happy to have him on today. His name is Bart Meacham.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Praise the sun god. Praise the sun god of the Teletubbies.
Yeah.
He could be our savior. No, I think it is important to consider also that some of the tools that we're going to use to try to protect ourselves from disease have been inherited by a system that hasn't been beneficial to us in our own development as people. I spent some time working in a factory for several years. There's a procedure to enter the floor to make sure that you are cleansed, and then you'll put on a suit and make sure that all of your hair is out of the way, and use industrial grade cleaners to take everything away. A lot of sickness in that factory, people getting ill. And part of it, my supposition is, not a doctor, but my supposition is that these people spend 8 to 10 hours a day in a sterilized environment and then go out into the real world. The real world is not a sterilized environment.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of diseases. We're constantly fighting off things, and that's what makes our immune system strong.
Yep.
That's what makes us strong as people. So if we isolate ourselves and put ourselves in these plastic suits, we're doing the opposite thing of what we need to do to protect our health and our well-being.
Yeah.
That's when that overly sanitized period where everybody was carrying around Purell.
Mm-hmm.
The sickness started going out of control because everybody was trying so hard to sanitize their immediate environment that they reduced their capacity to actually encounter germs. So if they just encountered some random shit that was a common cold, it might take somebody out. And we're getting to this point, I think, on the other end, there's people who then don't bathe and they don't use, they don't wash their hands, which is, I don't know how much that works. Everybody wants to do the extreme thing instead of trying to find a middle ground, but, obviously we can't sanitize our entire environment.
Nobody wants to listen to the Buddha. It's interesting that you mentioned that people don't want to work in the middle. They want to go to these extremes to find solutions.
Mm-hmm.
I have always had difficulty managing my scalp in Indiana because it's such a humid environment.
Yeah.
And I found that the only shampoo that works for me during winter months is like clinical strength Head and Shoulders, the most chemical shampoo there is.
Yeah.
And I can't use it in summer because it does this really crazy stripping thing to my hair that doesn't. It's like a seasonal pH.
It changed. Yeah, I have the same shit. Like my entire body pH changes between seasons to the point where it's I love winter months because I get hardly any pimples at all. Like I get no pimples, it seems like.
My hair is most manageable in winter, but I have the most problems with my scalp.
And even then,
it's so surreal.
Now that I think about it, I don't necessarily have to bathe during the winter because I don't sweat nearly as much. So I can go for 2 days and I won't smell, whereas during the summer, if I go for more than like 6 hours, it's like, no, I need to take a shower. Sometimes I take 3 showers during the summer.
Yeah.
Because there's and then this gets back to my pH is such. Remember those commercials where they try to feminize everything? Like, oh, your deodorant is, you can't wear.
pH balance for a woman.
Because I'm like, okay, apparently my pH is like more like women, because anytime I use deodorant or antiperspirant that's quote unquote for a man, it burns my skin.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I gotta fucking wear a secret, or else I gotta walk around not being able to put my arms down because it's literally burning my skin.
Oh, that's awful.
And that's where, I finally figured it out, and because I thought about it for a long time, and I'm like, why are they trying to make this about gender? I'm gonna try this fucking secret, or try, because part of it was I just found one that didn't smell like a woman.
Right.
Like who, God forbid I smell like lilac or some shit.
Sure, yeah.
or lavender.
Yeah.
Men like to smell like lavender too.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
a flower. It's outside.
and it shouldn't be feminine, quote unquote, to smell like lavender. That's the most ridiculous shit, you know. But anyway, I started trying it, and I'm like, oh my god, it actually works, and it doesn't burn my skin. Holy shit, you know. But this for if I was not confident in myself enough to have just started buying Secret or whatever, I'd still be suffering because this bullshit genderization of everything down to fucking deodorant, man. It's like, man can't wear Secret without being like it makes me a woman to wear fucking deodorant now. Really?
I've had long hair most of my life since I've been since I was a teenager. When I decided to grow my hair out, there have been phases where I would chop it off, but I just don't really like getting my hair cut, so I just let it grow out, and I like it out. Mm-hmm. And I can grow a long head of hair, which is, we've talked about this in the past, how it's kind of like our obligation to, male humans to grow our hair out.
Sure, yeah.
If you've got the genetics to grow your hair out, you should do it.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with growing out some long hair, and then, your ability to feel your environment is actually really incredibly enhanced.
Yep. Well, I was looking at my. Sorry, go ahead.
So, there's this. I think there's a thing with identity, where people we've got all these constructs of identity, and they're getting in the way of who we're supposed to be.
Yep.
These are these barriers that
Not accidental.
No, these are social constructs that are created by people at very high levels who are looking down and saying, we need to organize this stuff to meet our own ends, and it's preventing people from experiencing who they are.
Yep.
Some people will grow their hair out and they'll decide, oh, this is not for me, but somebody will, and they'll be like, oh, this is great.
Well, I don't know if you've seen these stories in Texas about black boys not able to grow out their dreads.
That's some bullshit.
Yeah.
And this is like,
That's some
I don't
straight
think
up
people really
crap.
understand how institutional that shit is ingrained in that. When I was a young person, I was not able to grow my hair past shoulder length either. Nobody was as a male, but that's a huge difference for what that means for black people's hair changes length dramatically in humidity versus dry environments anyway. So somebody's hair my hair goes past my ass now, but if it was possible for me to straighten it, it might touch the floor.
Yeah.
Or maybe even longer than that.
Yeah.
But at this point, I can't straighten it.
I've known you for 20 years now, and I'm pretty sure that you had short hair when we met, and you started dreading your hair shortly after we met.
I haven't cut it since before
I know.
that.
Yeah. That's the thing. When I was younger, I've tried a lot of different shampoos and conditioners, and 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there weren't really men's shampoos and conditioners. It was just shampoo and conditioner.
Shampoo, yeah.
Yeah. And most of them were marketed towards women. Mm-hmm. And so...
Because men didn't have to wash.
No, we just used soap. You had a bar of ivory or some Irish Spring, and you dealt with it.
It's really crazy how much, the hygiene industry was so much catered towards women with the notion that men didn't either have to do it or didn't want to do it, and it was just societally acceptable for that construct to exist.
Yeah, and some birth pains along the way, like the condemnation of men through the whole metrosexual thing, where suddenly men started to go, hey, my health is important to me, how I look is important to me, I can do some stuff too, and then society goes, haha, joke's on you.
Oh, you're just a closeted gay guy.
Yep.
If you care about how you smell and actually groom yourself, that means you're a closeted gay guy.
Yep.
Well, so out of the metrosexual backlash, I remember reading some extensions, some spin-offs of metrosexual. They included retrosexual and lumbersexual. Mm. And now we have the anosexual.
Yep.
Oh, well, yeah, that's
the opposite end of the spectrum, because
there's full-on magasexuals too.
That's true. Yeah, but if we allow for metrosexuals and retrosexuals, we've got to broaden the spectrum to include anosexuals and You know, that's a thing.
It's like, is this an aspect of eroticism or is this hormonal?
Oh, totally.
Just
I mean,
like
you've
a
never
reaction?
seen. There's total porn out there of like women with guns and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's you stumble upon certain shit on the internet.
Some
I
things you
mean,
can't unsee.
It would be fun to look inside of someone's brain the first time they experience something like that and realize they have some internal connection to it in terms of fetishes or how those things manifest. It would be beautiful to see the brain, the parts that are activating in there that cause the whole thing to happen. I don't know. I always felt kind of boring in that respect. There really wasn't anything that...
Nobody's kink is boring.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, because like, you know, you gotta like even asexuals are not actually boring if you analyze what it is. Like the idea of somebody who's so like not turned on by anything that they live a non-sexual life, that's not boring.
Right.
It's only boring in the construct of traditional cis hetero. You have to bang everything that moves.
Sure.
Like that is the pinnacle of sexual prowess, which is insane in that it's terribly dangerous behavior first off.
Sure. Yeah.
But then on top of that, I remember when Wilt Chamberlain, that whole thing was a story about how many chicks he had been with, and I'm like, in my young head, I'm like, doesn't that mean he like none of them wanted him again?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like, I feel like if you get in a position where you're actually good at that, you're not going to be able to go through so many people because you're going to have repeat customers or whatever, however you want to frame it, in that like, it's like there's only so many hours in a fucking day.
Right.
And if you're not just fucking constantly, then you can't fuck that many people unless you're just like moving on and on and on, and nobody's chasing after you. You know,
Well,
what I'm saying?
I
we
think-
love pattern recognition
I think
too.
that's the origin of Wilt.
The stilt.
No. Wilt.
That's funny. That's funny. That's funny shit, man.
We do love our pattern recognition, though. We want to count. We want to count everything. You know, Miyamoto Musashi. How many guys did he kill with a sword? Because that makes him better.
Yeah.
You know, we always wonder how much money do we have in the
He didn't wash
bank.
either, because he was scared somebody catch him off guard. So that motherfucker didn't take no baths. That's fucked
You know,
up, man.
how,
Like-
how could they not smell someone like that coming?
Right.
It's like, oh man, let's get out of here.
Yeah, makes you wonder about the stories about old grappling competitions where they would have fighters who would be like, "Well, I'm not going to wash for a few days. So when I
Right.
get up there, this
Yeah.
guy's going to tab."
People still do that shit
Yes,
today.
that's awful. That's awful.
Yeah, that's kind of messed up.
I don't actually. I think that in some cases, if it's too bad, the refs might step in and not allow it
Wow.
and make them because that's how you get staff and shit.
Right? Yeah, that's horrifying. Yeah.
I mean, but even then, there's been fighters who've straight gone into the octagon or ring or whatever, if whichever organization was staffed, that's clearly visible, just to have the show go on. And that's
Right.
like, you know, I look at in a lot of these cases as an observer and by proxy a participant as a spectator. I'm not comfortable condoning people putting themselves at unnecessary risk for the sake of my entertainment, because then that makes it partially my fault. And that's where I think people as passive observers don't take enough responsibility on what's going on in their shit, because the same shit's happening with the NFL, in that like the concussion problem was a bad thing for a very long time, and it's only in the last 10 or 20 years that people have really started trying to do anything with like solving the concussions. And
Sure.
like I feel like if you respect the people that you're trying to you know, these people who I'm watching, I want their careers to be as long and as fruitful as possible. So if I'm not, you know, when they changed the rules to not allow soccer kicks and no knees on the ground to the head, at first I was like, well, this is no longer a fight. But then I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, this is going to extend their careers a lot longer. And those kicks are kind of gratuitous anyway. So for the sake of quote unquote preserving the idea of a fight, there's already a referee. So I'm very comfortable with like removing things that are just gratuitous and going to preserve the fighters.
Sure.
Well, is it a
So-
street fight or is it a professional
Exactly.
martial art?
Exactly. But even in that, this is where there's certain things where they still have the 10 to 12
Or,
to
or do they
12
include
to
like a little
6.
mark to include like the number of like extra brutal knockouts?
Well, this is what I was getting at is there's still strikes that are not permitted that don't necessarily decide that it's gonna. The strike isn't what the determining factor is in making an extra brutal knockout. So like
That's right.
flying knees are still permitted, but the Jorge Masvidal flying knee of Ben Askren is an extra brutal knockout just because Ben Askren happened to be going for a takedown at the same time. So it was basically because he actually missed the first one and hit the second one.
Yeah.
So it's like it's not even. You can't even say the strike is it because somebody might miss one and land another strike, and that's what knocks the person out.
Right. It's never thrown in a sterile environment.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then we
So-
have like Conor McGregor's like flying. I'm not even sure what to call that. In his,
Kind of a flying shoulder.
it was
I
a
guess.
flying shoulder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rising shoulder is a really big deal. Now everybody's talking about it.
But it's not
people
even-
have been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
not a new strike.
No,
but-
no, not at all. But it's just now it was the deciding factor, right?
The
Well,
timing
no.
was impeccable.
This is the problem with that statement. So Cowboy Cerrone had fought 4 people in 365 days before the Conor fight. So he's fighting 5 people in 365
Every
days.
90 days, basically.
Exactly. You can't recover.
No,
Nobody
yeah.
can recover. So number one, he's a compromised fighter, acting as if that's not going to influence his capacity to bring his potential. And then number two, his hubris that would allow him to take that like fight any comer approach is also going to make him lose against the calculated fighter every single time that he's put into a situation where he's already fought 4 times in a year. So this is kind of where, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how tough Cowboy Cerrone is, the circumstances and the factors leading up to that fight guarantees he loses every time he comes up in that scenario. Right. He doesn't have to throw the fight. He doesn't have to wilt. He is probabilistically going to lose that specific fight. It doesn't matter if it's Conor McGregor. It doesn't matter if it's Tyrone Woodley.
Just because of the number of fights he
exactly, and the fact that those people are calculated about who they fight. Because like Kamaru Usman turns down fights. He doesn't fight anybody that the UFC brings in front of him because everybody's not rewarding, or everybody doesn't deserve a shot against him in this situation. So Tyrone Woodley did the same shit, but then the UFC turns around and tries to make people like Cowboy look awesome for taking any fighter, even though that's what makes him lose these fights every time. So that's kind of where
I thought his awesome factor was that he's been doing it for a long time too.
But that's part of it is he's like younger than us.
Oh,
he's 35, I believe.
Okay.
He looks like he's like 42 or maybe even 46.
He lives hard, too,
He lives
though, to be
hard.
Fair. Yeah.
Well,
but
he's
like
a
on
cowboy
jet
if you don't live
skis
hard,
and-
right?
Yes,
You
but
have
it's not
to-
just in the fight ring. Like he's always
No, I mean
doing
like
crazy
that's
stuff.
like
Yeah.
when I think of the the concept of a cowboy, it's a hard riding, tough working, hard working, like tough as nails, hands like leather,
Yippee-ki-yay.
weather resistant.
But that person only would win championship level matches in the early 90s in the UFC because the sport had not developed as much.
Yeah.
So now, if you want to become a champion, I'll give George St. Pierre as an example because he's been able to win in one era, step away, reform himself, and come back and then beat a champion in another era. So he's the prime example of what it takes to be a quote-unquote champion in mixed martial arts, period, no matter what era.
Yeah.
And what he did is constantly refine himself, but he would analyze his opponent And then whatever his opponent was best at, he would focus on that before every single fight. So then if it was boxing, if it was jiu-jitsu, he would come in and fight his opponent to fight his opponent's specialty to prove that he had become better than his opponent in that area. But he had wrestling in his back pocket and Kyokushin and karate, which is also he was always a black belt in that.
That's just
but because he had those two, everybody thought he was a grappler, but he could go switch to striking at any given time.
Yeah.
So this is where he could always change his strategy in any area that his opponent could, and not be put in a situation where he couldn't rebound. And this is the difference between GSP in that he had those things both from the beginning, where you have somebody like Hoist Gracie who was a specialist in jiu-jitsu early on and then tried to pick up Muay Thai later. When he came in and tried to strike with Matt Hughes, he got destroyed because Matt Hughes had been striking for longer. You can't do what GSP did if you're not GSP, and this is one of those things that gets back to innate talent, where some people are physical savants and can pick up. John Jones is another one. He called his martial art, or he calls it look, see, do.
That's right.
And I don't think people really truly understand the implications of what that means, because he's so good at it, it doesn't even seem real. And what it is if somebody does something, he can look at it, see it, internalize it, and then do it. He doesn't have to physically do it before he can do it. He can look at somebody, see it, and then do it. That's a whole different martial art than what anybody else is doing. And that's why when he's been saying, I'm a look-see-do fighter, people are, oh, look-see-do, and don't truly understand what that really means in terms of physical intelligence.
Well, I think that's actually a really, really clever play on words, because it utilizes vocables that we would associate with children. And so it taps into this kind of humor of childlike, oh, watch me do this.
Yep.
But on an adult level, we know that it's like, it's not attainable all the time. Some things you have to, there's more to it than just turning a knob or pressing a button. But
especially once you start studying more about children and childhood development, which was kind of a gift to me in having a child. I started to look more into it and understanding that part of the learning phases of children, particularly in that sweet spot of 4 years old, comes from them being literally in a different mind space than we are. We have a tendency to be in that beta consciousness state of constantly having to compare and contrast and against the data bank that we already have, and they're more in this theta state of being receiving and open, and it's a different part of the brain, it's a different way of relating to things. So it's kind of a gift in a lot of ways to be able to see the world that way, to learn how to see the world that way.
Oh yeah. Well, I think we spend all of our lives essentially learning how to do something, and in the process forgetting how to see the world for the first time. And it's not until we get really, really old and forget everything that we get to see the world again for the first time.
Yeah.
And so life is kind of cruel like that, I guess.
I think it's kind of beautiful. When I was young, I loved hanging out with old people.
Me too.
Because
man.
they would teach me about the things that I couldn't see, the things of the past, and it was direct. It felt like a direct connection. It wasn't something out of a book.
They were transferring their experience.
Straight up time machines. They're opening portals into the past.
But then you get older and you start to kind of almost resent them, because you see this eventual progression to be this person who will cut people off at stoplights. And that's difficult. You start to move more towards children and being around. At least I do. I appreciate them more now.
It depends. There's old people who never lost that childhood perspective that you're speaking of, because I believe that's what ends up making some people feel. I have a friend he was a former professor. He's probably 60. No, he may even be 70 something. But he's a straight up kid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's just a straight up kid in the best way, in that he sees things from a perspective that when you see it, they're like, this is an absurd perspective from you as an older person, but I could see if you're seeing things from like a child's perspective, how you get to that point. And like,
Imagine they have the most fun.
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They
But
have
we'll
the most
fight
fun.
about stuff in that, you know, I'll try to come at something from a logical perspective, and he'll sit it from the illogical, visceral that only a kid can come from.
Sure.
And it's like, I get what you're doing, and I can still do that, but also there's an element of when you're dealing with adults, they don't respond well to that perspective, which is the fucked up part. Is, you know, kids have the simplest and often the best to the point solutions to problems that adults can see solutions, but they can't see the simplest solutions because of the adult brain. But finding that simplest path to something is very difficult to keep as you start learning the layers of existence that society brings. And I think in that, you know, it's all bullshit anyway, but when other people believe the bullshit, you still have to know that it's there to be able to navigate it. And I think that's the difference between, you know, I'll hear a lot of times from white people that, like, I need to ignore racism and race as a construct, with them not even acknowledging the idea that I may be able to already not believe in race as a construct but still have to live in it.
Right.
And it's one of those things where empathy outside of one's own position is weird to do, because you have to be able to understand someone's position, but then also be able to, because you never lived in it, you can't offer any advice. Like, you know what we can't do as three men? Offer women advice on how to deal with fucking misogyny. That's something we can never do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's something that I think a lot of men will do. They shouldn't. And it's one of those things where people in their own situation, because they've had life experiences, then try to extend how they've dealt with things to other people's life experiences in certain spots where it's completely inappropriate and it doesn't work. And that's where I'm like, because I was thinking about it.
What's misandry is the corollary to misogyny, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to make sure.
But okay, let's discuss misandry for a minute. In that, when we're talking about misogyny, we're talking about something that is institutional and generationally institutional, to the point that there is no country, I don't think, in the history of existence in which the standard was women owning property and the men being the main property as the standard. I don't think that has ever happened in human history, because when people talk about matriarchies, that's not what matriarchy actually is. Matriarchy just means that women can be leaders in the same capacity as men. It doesn't mean women only lead. And that's the crazy shit about matriarchy. It's not even like the exact opposite of patriarchy.
Yeah.
Right.
So then when we're discussing
Matriarchy is more inclusive.
exactly, that's the fucked up thing. So when you see ancient Egypt was more of a matriarchy, because when you see the images of the queens holding their arms around the men, that's showing that the woman is superior in status, but embracing the man as her equal, as a superior. So there's and even then, when you see a man in Egyptian imagery wearing a wig that's like more like it looks feminine, that's because a man looking to appear like a woman was seen as a trait of a wise person. So there's all these things that we're not taught about in Egypt, because it makes women look good in the first place, but they want to romanticize parts of Egyptian lore but leave out all this shit where they treated women equally, which is fucking crazy. You know, when you find out all this stuff about Egyptian matriarchy that's not patriarchy, even though, again, it's not like because we live in a patriarchy, we're not presented matriarchies in as if they're in the proper context because they're being defined by patriarchies.
Yeah.
Androgynous spiritual leaders is really important too, because we have somebody who isn't just their own thing. They are, by their nature, the union of the masculine and the feminine, which is the source of their wisdom, is being able to unite into one essence, is to have that, the ability to communicate that to other people. So now, when the androgynous being needs to speak to the masculine, it can do so with the voice of the feminine.
Yeah.
To try to communicate something to them, and the inverse also becomes true.
Well, that's funny. I mean, it's not funny. I think it's a great framing in that I had a spiritual guide named Marilyn Isaacs who she presented this framing to the young men a long time ago because she was trying to destigmatize embracing feminine quote unquote traits. And I think that's where, when she's teaching the young boys about this framing, it definitely helped us understand. Because, I remember a point where I was, a football player in middle school or whatever. And my idea of sports was such that we would have arguments with the cheerleaders about whether cheerleading is a sport or not. And then, it's more so in the framing, it would be full on debates. And it wasn't like us shitting on it. It's like, like debating the rules of cheerleading. And in the process, I'm like, okay, this does kind of have, the rules. And by the end, I have to acknowledge
Right.
that it is a sport, in fact, based on their rebuttals to all these things. Whereas if I was too pig-headed to acknowledge that all of their rebuttals, in fact, qualified cheerleading as a sport, then I would still, to this day, not acknowledge it as being a sport.
Right.
Because then it's like, if you can't acknowledge logical things, then that becomes an illogical bias. So that's where, in a sense, you can't necessarily blame men or boys for not knowing these things at first. But once they're introduced to these concepts, you can blame them for not acknowledging these concepts and learning them. And that's kind of where personal responsibility about ignorance is one of these things where I don't hold racist people responsible for not knowing about things, but once they learn about them, I hold them responsible for their beliefs and actions afterwards. Everybody doesn't have time to learn everything, and I think that's important to understand the concept of empathy, in that people's lives very much dictate what they have the time to learn. And in that, you can't assume everyone's had the same learning time or experience. And everybody's better for that assumption, I believe.
Yes. And transcending that environment, it's very easy for us to be brought up a certain way. What do they say generally? 90% of people have the same religion that their parents did, follow the same sports teams, vote for the same presidents. Being able to free yourself of that, is important. And for a long time, maybe that's beginning to change, but for a long time, that's what the dialogue of college was supposed to be, was to finally have the experience of escaping a system of indoctrination, of being forced to believe something, to be in an environment surrounded by people where you open up and say, all right, what else is there? What else is out there? So that should be.
But then, when people are scared to go to entire countries because of the coronavirus, we get stuck in a ideological bubble that we then, I believe they call it the Great Firewall of China. Well, Americans don't understand that there's some sort of, great ideological iron dome of thought that we're not able to pierce or
we don't even get a glass ceiling anymore.
No.
Nope.
No, we totally have an iron dome of thought. and nobody can transcend above it. I totally understand now these concepts of what it means for species to be stuck in their lower selves of, there's porn dominates what the internet is used for, if we're honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
But that's because our species is stuck in its pelvis. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, except for the fact
that's like a really early development stage.
It is.
It's manipulating two really important systems too. It's manipulating your endocrine system,
Yep.
your ability to have arousal, but it's also beginning to manipulate your visualization,
Yep,
your ability to
absolutely.
visualize. How many times in our lives do we use that? We sleep, maybe some of us dream. When we dream, we are visualizing. Maybe some of us get to have lucid dreams where we get to be in a space that doesn't exist, but yet it does. And so we have these mechanisms and we rarely use them to our own benefit. Perhaps we fill ourselves with negativity. Somebody cuts us off in the lane and we imagine it's GTA and we get to run them off the road. It's rare that we get to use those systems of visualization to our benefit and then not have those images put inside of our head, but we can whenever we want.
I mean, and sex is everywhere to the point where, as someone who, I'm not asexual, but I'm so tired of seeing sex everywhere as a human being that I can't imagine what it's like as a parent when you're trying to censor these environments in a way where I have ad blockers on and there's still asses everywhere, asses and tits everywhere when I'm trying to just find something on the internet and I'm not looking for that. And that's why I'm like, looking at it as an individual, that's fucked up that we can't navigate our environment with constantly not having our lower selves attempted to be exploited in a way where somebody's trying to get my fucking credit card information, steal my identity or some shit. That's all that's happening there because it's not really MILFs in my local area willing to meet up. That's not real.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I'm tired. Yeah, you get tired of seeing this.
And I don't know how many fucking dumbass dudes fall for that shit, thinking that the fucking chatbot that they're talking to is a real MILF in their local area that's willing to meet up with them and be their sugar mama. Because I see these ads and I'm like, fuck, man, there's some dumbass dude. There's probably 3 out of 5 dumbass dudes out there that think that shit is real at least one time enough to give them their credit card information and talk to a fucking chatbot that's like built to exploit a dude that's not connecting the pictures they're looking at with fucking fake
reality.
Yeah.
No, I speaking of that, a few weeks ago I decided, I don't remember which one, but I decided to try to have an online conversation with one of the artificial intelligences that they have online. I can't remember the name of which one it was. It has its own little digital image. I just wanted to see what it would be like to talk to, if you can consider it a conversation with an artificial intelligence. I was surprised by some of the questions. I said hello to it, and it said hello back to me, asked me how I was doing. I said it was fine, and then asked me whether or not I believed in life after death. And I said...
That one's been trained by a lot of people who...
just hit it hard right out of the gate with a conversation.
That's what a lot of people mostly do, in fact, because I worked on machine learning in like 2007 for my first degree, and it's funny how chatbots were doing that shit then, like out the gate, because people they want to, because the Turing test was initially you're basically just talking to a fake or the other side, and you don't know if it's real or not, and the chatbot has to fool you into thinking it's a real person. So out the gate, people are asking it, "Oh, are you real? What is real? What do you think real is?" And they get really existential with chatbots immediately. So almost all of the time, these chatbots are like philosophically loaded machine learning programs that almost all focus on that aspect.
It's really incredible.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but also strange how much a conversation like that can mimic 2.5 hours into a college party.
Well, isn't
Yep.
that also like kind of like the easiest way to get it to wake up and become
For
sentient,
sure, yeah.
is to make it question what is existence.
Or then that makes us deconstruct what sentience is, and in fact, where it's just a sequence of questions.
Sure.
That's
Yep.
all sentience is.
If you can
Philosophically.
if you can formulate these questions, then you might exist.
And then the issue is, most people don't want to accept that fact to acknowledge that programs can become sentient and rather quickly, but it's because our definition of sentience is self-referential.
It's
and
a
Yes.
moving target.
yeah, it's totally a moving target, but it's also a post-Judeo-Christian, I won't say post, a Judeo-Christian concept meant to sound as if it's not a Judeo-Christian concept and meant to be scientific in a Judeo-Christian science era.
Unfortunately, that's absolutely true. Yeah. And part of that comes down to this lack of sovereignty over the self, that only certain figures are going to be capable of transfiguration.
Well,
Well-
if you decide what program is sentient, essentially you have godlike status at that point. You
And-
decide what's alive and what's not, and what
Yeah.
just is software.
Sure.
I think
You
in
become
that
Schrodinger.
construct, like, we've also danced around the notion of sentience as being something that is an individual construct and not something that can be a shared construct.
Yeah.
So there's no sentient hives that can't exist in this construct.
Yeah.
If you're a hive mind, that means you don't have autonomy, even though maybe that's part of the sentience, is that it's not that they don't have autonomy, it's that they're collectively sentient. And I think this is why the Borg as a construct are hard for many people to understand, why they don't recognize, when people would beam aboard and the hive would just ignore them, I think a lot of people would not understand the concept as to why the hive didn't see these individuals as threats as a unit until an individual within the hive started getting attacked, and the rest of the hive started figuring it out. Because it's really when they started having, what was it? I don't think 7 to 9 was the first one, but
The interface, the first of the human Borg interface.
yeah, well, but the ones that have regained, I think 7 was the first one that we found out about that had regained their individuality. But there's others before her, and then there was others after her. But the notion...
Oh, wait, Hugh on Next Generation.
Yeah.
They woke him up, and he learned to not.
That's right. You're right. Yeah, that's what it was. Because I was like, I knew there was one before.
And then Hugh was
Yep.
returned to the collective, but his programming had changed and
Yeah,
infected
it
his
affected
cube.
So
And-
that's what started.
And then the Borg isolated the cube, but that cube was like drifting aimlessly until Lore found it, and then copied segments of the emotion chip into like a subroutine, and then loaded it up into them, and that's how he convinced Data to leave the Enterprise, and that was the final battle with Lore. I think.
That's such a high level discussion of individuality.
I also just described I think 7 or 8 different episodes across multiple seasons.
Yeah. Well, but it's the story that
Yeah.
gets,
It's a good story.
and I think this is kind of where, when we're discussing history, history doesn't happen in an arrow.
Yeah.
It happens in waves, and I think Western history is poor at teaching that concept, which is also why you have whole ass adults who don't know about French colonialism and how it impacted up to the 50s and 60s and shit. Because that's where I'm looking at Americans, and I mean, I learned about
What was it? The French wouldn't leave Vietnam.
dude, there's just so much shit.
The French wouldn't
Dude.
leave all sorts of portions of Southeast Asia.
I mean, there's so much shit that the French did recently.
The Portuguese
that
had
they
had
don't
control
teach
of
you.
Macau up until 1995 or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Britain still had a colony called Hong Kong until 1997.
Yeah.
So
Shit like that.
colonialism is still fresh.
And
Very
that's a great
fresh.
example, because that was something that suddenly people started going, oh, that's why they're upset. Their political ramifications.
So
for these things.
here's something that occurred to me. The majority of the protesters who were calling for the British-like system to return, well, I don't think very many of them were actually alive during colonial occupation.
Right.
I think some of them may have been like babies, or they may have been like a twinkle in their parents' eyes.
Yeah.
But
How many of them are mixed race too?
yeah,
Because I'm like, you know, I was thinking about this. You're technically half white, right?
yeah,
When you walk around, do you get white privilege?
no,
Because you don't look white.
no. I
So
I suffer the emasculation of being Asian.
It's well, yeah. Well, it's really crazy how that shit works. But I bet people think you're really good at math.
Oh yeah, and they want me to fix their computer, and they want me to take pictures of them
Well,
and shit.
you actually are good at math, so it
Yeah.
works against you in that. But the problem is, there's all these elements of you as a person who is half white, but also not half white, get the effect of the one drop rule that exists in this country, in that when we have whiteness in America, it's expressed as something that's a construct based in European purity, and not all European, it's specifically Western European, because if you look at the fear of Russians, that's the Eastern European hatred. Those are not white people in America.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about Slavic people think they're white until they get to America and they started calling all kinds of immigrant and all these other things that, you know, the Red Scare, and because it's the Yellow Scare with the Chinese, because there's some racist ass shit. But it's the Red Scare with the Russians.
You know, I think that you know, United States actually went to war with Korea at one point.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Koreans' adoption of Methodism is like, you know, an express entry into
It's
American
fucking
culture.
colonialism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's because when you go to Korea and you see all the fucking crosses everywhere, like, where the fuck did this shit come from? Like, it's
Methodist
so weird.
missionaries went there and
It's
set up
so
shop.
weird, man. It's one of the craziest things where I'm like, oh, okay, this is fucking colonialism in action.
Yeah.
Hardcore.
Finding the roots of any of those countries from a religious standpoint is very difficult. Japan was very lucky. They managed to keep a hold of their Shintoism, which is pretty cool. China mainly got assimilated by a lot of separate political and religious factions to the point where their shamanistic and ritualistic traditions all got kind of assimilated into Taoism.
But that one's weird because they started destroying their own shit first.
That's
Yeah.
true. True.
That's one of those weird contexts where it's like, looking at the Chinese government, they were one of the originators of fucking destruction of religious culture for the sake of nation building, and they perfected that shit before the Europeans to a degree, in that, I mean, there's, you know, we can point, what is it, the Yellow Turban Rebellion?
Yeah.
The first one, not the one in the 70s. I'm talking about like the old one. Like,
We're talking like 12th century.
yeah. So that's what I'm saying. They've been fucking learning how to destroy religious cultures for fucking centuries.
They're millennia.
I mean, yeah, millennia. Really. Like,
I think
really.
I think.
If we're technical.
Hold on, I've got a little calendar somewhere.
Wow, you got a calendar? That's awesome.
I just gotta find my.
That's where I'm. You know, I'm not trying to fucking. I'm phrasing these things in question because I know you know more.
Okay, so the Shia dynasty was from 2100 to 1600 BC.
Jesus.
And in 1600 BC, the Shang dynasty began, and that went on until 1100 BC.
Jesus.
So these are like, this is
Yeah.
dynastic
Oh
China
my
here.
God.
So
Yeah.
the Zhou dynasty went from 1100 to 221 BC. So
Wow.
over 1,000 years that there was one dynasty. So I'm pretty sure that that's when written Chinese was started to solidify, and then the Qin dynasty unifies all of it under China, and that's in 221 BC, and that lasts till 207 BC. So that only lasted 14 years.
Right, the factualization starts really ramping
So
up.
the Han dynasty lasts from 206 BC to 220 AD. So they've got like 400 years until the Three Kingdoms. And then that's 220 to 280. So they got 60 years. The Wei, the Shu, and the Wu dynasties. Western Jin is 265 to 316. You know, everything's starting to move pretty quickly here.
And the Three Kingdoms is always such a big cultural thing where you can even find people here that have heard of it, but it's a really small little piece in a
60
big story.
years.
But that's why it gets so perfected by that point.
Sure.
Yeah, and so by the time we get to the Song Dynasty, and they're the ones that lost everything to like the Mongols. You know, that's when Genghis Khan goes in. Like the Song Dynasty was pretty opulent, but during the time of the Khan, like things actually stabilized in China, in the whole world for that matter, because they instituted like regulation over trade, and my understanding of it is they were like, they would kidnap smart people from different regions, and then they would make them hang out and like explain what's going on in that region, let them live. You know.
And tried to start establishing, as it kind of happened in the earlier Sumerian dynasties, the idea of universal laws, trying to find a handful of things that everybody can agree on, because we don't have the infrastructure or the training to have regulatory agencies in every city. But if everybody can agree that we don't kill each other and we don't take each other's wives, we'll be okay.
So from there on out, they all last about 100 years, more or less, until you get to the Ming Dynasty, and that's like 300 years. And that gets us to 1644. And then in the Qing Dynasty, and that's like pretty much the countdown to the end of dynastic China, official dynastic China. That's from 1644 to 1911.
Yeah.
So that's still kind of, that's within, my grandparents' lifetime. And I think since Xi Jinping convinced Parliament to take the one-party system, or get the one-party system to remove term limitations, I think it's fairly safe to say that the communist dynasty is in full effect.
For sure.
Yes. Yeah.
sure.
Especially with the building of this new Silk Road. Wow.
Oh, man.
The uniting an entire hemisphere. And what are we doing? We're making
China's
fun of
doing,
Canada.
as much as there's some like fucked up shit going on with China, there's a lot of things that China does that's like cool, finally.
Yeah,
Right.
Like,
for sure.
about damn time you started doing some really cool shit with your incredible resources.
Well, and I think in that
And it
they
sucks.
know they can't exist if the Earth is destroyed.
Yeah.
So I think that's what, more than anything, is they've acknowledged that they can't destroy the planet and still be a dynasty on a fucking empty Earth.
They can't. China itself will be consumed by the rest of the world if the rest of the world collapses.
Yeah.
That's
And how horrifying of a notion is
yeah,
that?
right. And so it's in their best interest to ensure the stability of the planet, no matter what the global interests of other groups may be. They have a very, especially being like the longest standing nation, that's still around, functional.
3.1 billion people in one country.
Is that what it is now?
I think so.
Holy crap!
Yeah.
That can't be right.
Just even comprehending.
Yeah, because we're almost at 8
billion
billion
is-
people now. It's
Yeah.
gone from 7 to almost 8 very quickly.
I had to try to explain that to my daughter, the difference between a million and a billion.
1.3 in 2017, but let's see.
Yeah, I think the global population is now at 7.5 billion. It was like 6.7 in 2018 or some shit.
Yeah.
7.7.
7.7.
In 2019. We're gonna hit 7.8 billion this year.
Yeah. They're probably, their projections are probably low, and it'll probably be 8.3.
Yeah.
Well, because I think what's happening is obviously the medicine's getting better, but because now people are understanding the arbitrary aspect of medicine and what's being restricted and held from other people, it's a lot easier for extremely rural areas to get medicine that they needed before.
So-
So
That's
now those
true.
people are
So-
surviving more.
So earlier we were talking about like people, getting sick and dying, right? I was watching this show, The Good Place, where they were talking to this guy who somehow gets into heaven, and it's the result of he was just a good dude who helped people, and he died because he cut his hand. He lived in a time when there were no antibiotics and no medicine,
Sure.
didn't have
That's
first
funny.
aid,
Yeah.
and And so it's like, you drink some bad water and you'll die.
Yeah.
You cut your hand, you die. You get a splinter, you die. So last night I was, talking to a buddy of mine. We were talking about civil tension, social tension, all that kind of stuff. And we were talking about the complexity of people who think that civil war is about to erupt and what that really means. And so we started looking up numbers for people dying in Civil War battles, and there were some pretty high numbers, 50-something thousand for Gettysburg, I think, and 620,000 total people died during the Civil War, but the number of battlefield injuries was only 200 and something thousand, and the vast majority of people who died during the Civil War died from things like splinters, or they would get blisters on their feet from marching too far, and they would get gangrene, and they would then get sepsis. Wow. Or most of the people who died from poor hygiene, and a lack of awareness about small injuries, because that stuff would all add up. Because there's blood everywhere. Had to stink to high hell. That was during a time when America stank the worst.
Yeah.
But
it's hard to imagine.
That's the thing. So there are a lot of misconceptions, I think, about the way things used to be. People during the Dark Ages, sure, plague killed a lot of people, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people died from things like splinters or drinking bad water, or they were crawling around in a cave and didn't realize that they had been getting their hands all over like a
Meanwhile, they had
vein
running water in China.
Meanwhile, yeah. Yeah, the Dark Ages, it's interesting, like, the Dark Ages were only dark for a certain portion of the world.
Yeah, the rest of them had
which they
some
don't
lights
teach
on.
you. This is, that's what the fucked up part is.
Yeah, it just becomes a narrative. This was the time when we were ignorant and dumb, and then
everybody was ignorant.
Then the Renaissance came all of a sudden out of nowhere, and
then the Renaissance catches up to the economic system that China has been using between the eastern seaboard of China and like the western seaboard of Africa, and Europeans are like, wait a second, what is this? And they're like, this is our commerce highway. It's been around for 300 years. Where have you been? And
trying to attack from a boat for the last 250 years. It hasn't been going well.
Oh, here, try this bow and arrow. We've been engineering it for 400 years.
I've lost playing Civilization now several times. It was one of those video games where I thought, you know what, I feel like I can learn something here. I didn't learn much. I learned that Mahatma Gandhi is very quick to promote nuclear aggression very quickly in the Civilization games. He's really chill in the early days, and you can trade with him and build boats. But in the late game,
so he's just your friend until he gets some nukes.
The UN becomes formed, and about the time the UN becomes formed, he's like, okay, now I'm drawing lines in the sand. So it's kind of a strange choice.
That dude was racist as fuck, apparently.
Yeah. I guess if he becomes president of,
Apparently he was like fond of sharing his floor mat with young girls too.
Yeah, he did not.
There's a bunch of questionable shit about him that like the more that I read, the more I think it's like, what the fuck is going on?
The more I talk to actual Indian people, the more I'm like, oh wow, okay, because then you realize how many Indian people are like, fuck that dude.
Yeah.
never meet your heroes, right? That's why they say that.
Yeah. Because they don't, it's the same shit with MLK in the sense of when you have somebody who's supposed to represent an entire people, the cishet white patriarchy wants to present them in a palatable way where they're like, we're not going to tell you anything about the socialist stuff with MLK. We're just going to celebrate his holiday. You go have a barbecue and don't ask any questions.
I think if Mahatma Gandhi were around today, he would be a U.S. senator.
Yeah. Of a similar level of promotion, at least. Yeah. On the news about as frequently, probably in the news cycle. Man, I've been avoiding a lot of it. I just can't look at it anymore. On top of the fact that it's become increasingly difficult to find good news outlets that I feel like are trying to communicate information and not an agenda.
I go to phys.org and physics.com and
yes.
I also go to publications that specialize in physics.
Yeah.
And
I spend a lot of time on PubMed. It's good.
I also read about synthesizers too. I read about synthesizers a lot because I think that's also kind of fun.
You gotta have those things. You gotta have those things you
But
love.
yeah, astronomy and physics, that's the most interesting stuff to read about these days.
Pretty much.
Everything else is just some variation on last week or the week before.
Or the 80s
Or the 80s or the 50s. Well, yeah, I mean, now that we've had the reemergence of the 20s culture in full effect, I think that it's pretty safe to say, goddamn robber barons.
I really didn't want to see them bring back the 90s. I feel like maybe it's just me. I didn't really feel like it was that long ago. And then all of a sudden, we're just supposed to live through a new sociocultural copy of a previous decade. And then I go see Captain Marvel. She's wearing a Nine Inch Nails shirt. I'm like, that's from the Fragile era. It's like 1999. The movie's supposed to be 1995. You messed up. So a little detail. The details are where the devil
Hey
is.
man, the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So-
Got to get the details right.
If their props department had really been on top of that, they would have caught it.
Yeah, immersion breaking.
Yeah.
Like I was there. I remember that stuff. I remember Samuel L. Jackson looking that panicked
Yeah.
in movies back then. So
And by the time that shirt would have existed, a lot of the other clothing styles wouldn't have existed.
yeah, things got quiet in the late '90s for a little bit. You know, there was this weird kind of quiet before the storm. Everybody was scared about the turning to a new age, and that's the part they don't really
I
communicate.
thought everyone was afraid because they thought their banking information was going to
Yeah,
get launched.
Y2K.
Y2K.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. That was the big one.
Yeah.
That was the big one. It was going to wipe us out.
It was going to destroy all the financial systems. And I remember there was a computer company called Tandem, and they were known for putting two discrete computer systems inside one container and having them run in parallel architecture.
Ooh.
And this was they had been working on some kind of solution to this for like decades. They're like, guys, this is going to happen in like 20 years. We need to come up with a solution now. And it took them 20 years to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because
Wow.
then the media hyped it up and ridiculed it as if the solution just happened
Yeah.
and or
didn't.
as if it was never a problem. But a
It
bunch
took
of
them
people
20
were scrambling.
Years, 20
yeah.
years once they figured it out. And it took them 40 years to realize that there was going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Which is actually pretty good for, the ground level of computer science with hardware that's fully realized and not just some concept or theory.
Well, what people didn't realize is they should have let them fucking
Eat it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and lose everybody's credit in the first place. 'cause
Yeah, let's
that's
just
what would've
reset. We're at
happened.
the end of an age, at the
Yeah.
end of a decade. Let's just
If
hard
everybody
reset.
would have realized that all their credit
Would've
history
gotten-
would have been like, all your credit cards that you would have had, you wouldn't have to pay that shit anymore. They're like, wait a minute, let Y2K happen, but they're like, oh, my money in my bank.
Well, it would have, yeah, but
Yeah,
it would
nobody was
also-
doing that back then.
it
Nobody
also
was like,
would have
let it
wiped
happen.
out all of the financial information that
Yep, that fucked up financial system. You mean that has a 14 trillion? What is it? $17 trillion debt? I don't even know what
I
the
think
debt is.
the world owes 200 and something trillion dollars now. The entire world's debt combined.
I mean, but
who does the
America's
entire world owe the debt to?
fucking banks?
God
The
damn.
lizard people under the earth.
No, it's the banks, man. Because
okay.
then that's the whole thing is when people are like, who do we owe the debt to? It's fucking banks. They literally have made deals with our governments to make this debt a contractual obligation for the future to a specific set of banks. It's not to nobody. It's
Yeah.
to a few banks.
And so
There are people
And-
who this debt is owed to.
yeah, and so those banks are run by groups of shareholders.
Yep.
So
Now,
they're
Because
Selling-
and
yeah,
originally it
selling
would
the
be
debt.
like the first Bank of England,
Mm.
which would have been owned by the fucking monarchy. That's that's one of the original charters who we never paid off.
Yep, the source of our wealth.
Or when people are like, who, I think it was like Spanish monarchy that paid for Christopher Columbus's shit.
Speaking
That's who what
speaking
the money
of
would be owed
British
to. and
monarchy,
shit
I
like
saw this
that.
picture of Ed Sheeran photoshopped into an image of the royal family, and the fake headline read that Ed Sheeran was going to step in as the family's royal ginger for Prince Harry. I hope
like a soap opera. This role will now be played by...
Well, that's what, like how okay. This country was founded on against taxation without representation, right?
yeah.
The royal family embodies using taxes without representation, and that's where I'm looking at CNN and Fox News and any of these American media outlets. not approaching the story from that perspective is, you know, any other perspective's un-American. They should always be shitting on the royal family, any royal family, whether it's the fucking Saudi, Thai, especially the Saudi and Thai, because they're fucked up. At least the British royal family isn't directly fucking people over. It's only through their tax books. The fucking Saudi royal family is fucked.
Well, the only people I hear talking about that are the far right. There's a lot of that voice in the far right, but they're kind of saying that about everybody, so I guess that's not fair. But people who are considered far right, I guess, like Steven Crowder, has brought up some of that stuff before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, here and there.
I mean, I
off
don't
the
know.
cuff. But it is interesting that it seems like when those dialogues pop up, it's only in relationship to people who are already trying to, you know, point the finger to see who's responsible when, you know, without accepting that responsibility.
Because even then, the narrative has somehow turned to make Meghan Markle out to be a bad person. When I'm like, she's out here fucking helping end monarchy indirectly and sort of directly, quietly. She could have come out and make a fucking big scene about it.
Is she
but
Canadian?
I think she's American.
She's American?
Yeah, because both of her parents are American. Her mom, I believe, was an actress and also did makeup, and I think her dad did lighting. And they both worked in Hollywood, so that's why she's a fucking actress.
Huh.
I mean, she may be Canadian, but I was under the assumption she's American.
Yeah, I don't really know anything about
I don't really know anything about her either, except that the fucking media is shitting on this black woman because she's black. So I'm gonna sit here and be like, don't, you know, like, I'm not gonna pile on that, but on top of that, I'm gonna come out and be like, let's look at what she's doing as a person.
I totally hear that.
And then I'm looking at it like, hey, she's helping end in the fucking monarchy. As an American, y'all should be fucking celebrating that shit for that specific perspective. But they're trying to make her out. Her own dad is shitting on her because she's helping fuck up the monarchy. And this motherfucker's American. Like, hey, boomer, fucking sit your ass down. Because that's where, you know, again, I don't know when I think Disney helped contribute to this princess wannabe culture in America. But at some point, we fucking dumped monarchs' tea into the fucking ocean. That's what this country is about. Dumping their fucking tea. That's what we do to monarchs. We don't pay for their tea. We dump their fucking tea. Yeah. We don't pay for their cake. We eat their cake. Yeah. That's what we do in America. That's the quintessential American perspective. That's the one thing that if you're black, you're white, you're Republican, Democrat, you should all agree against monarchy.
Yes.
That's the one thing we should all be able to agree on as Americans. But fucking CNN and Fox News and fucking MSNBC, for some reason, have whatever idea that promoting monarchies is like, I don't even know how to, it's like some benevolent force that just exists to please their cameras and doesn't have any negative impact on the people who are paying for their existence.
And, you know, it's in literature, we see a lot of characters that essentially are like sniveling worms that are all doting on the royalty because they think it gets them closer to having some kind of, you know, illusion of freedom, realizing this illusion that they too might be able to eat at the table or something like that. And you know, it just, when you were talking, it just reminded me of what was it, like the Snape character from Lord of the Rings. Like, you know, pale and just slimy. And then for some reason I thought of Ted Cruz.
I think that's the one good thing about the idea of entrepreneurship. One thing I kind of appreciate about the story of Andrew Yang was, you know, here's somebody who is a reminder of the other aspect of the American way, which is pulling yourself up from nothing and becoming something, and not having to dote on someone else, not having to take campaign finance money from some external source, and we'll raise our own money the old-fashioned way.
I mean, but I feel like that's still a false narrative in that he's depending on his donors. He never really they never really came from nothing. He had a great job. He was a fucking successful,
right,
you know, he was never,
From
you know what I'm
Desi,
saying?
right, yeah, didn't-
and that's
not
where
a
I think it
puppet.
becomes like disingenuous. Where I'm looking at it, I can't. When people are accepting campaign donations from people who are not wealthy in the first place, but also should not be paying for someone to achieve a platform that's not themselves, because ultimately the DNC is going to decide. So if we're all just throwing away money for the DNC to ultimately come in and be the deciders, it's kind of an exploitative byproduct of the current system. But at the same time, he has no choice, because otherwise he's going to get drowned out by fucking billionaire Bloomberg, who's going to be able to just decide Andrew Yang's complete narrative for him, in the same way that Hillary got her narrative decided for her by the right wing and and even Obama at one point, because Obama was the 3 a.m. person, right?
Yeah.
I think he's the one that did the 3 a.m. call. If my memory serves me correctly, that was a left wing attack. Right?
I think
Am I?
I think the
to.
dilemma with Andrew Yang is that he's like cardboard.
Yeah.
And I think that if he really wants to get people to know him, he needs to show a little bit of Andrew Yin.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. It's important,
That's
the shot of the candidate with his family and stuff and these things. But once again, it's difficult because here we have this guy who's probably devoted his whole life to the business, to these things. And so
I'm not asking for pictures or video of him like hanging out at the side of a minivan with the door open, holding a racquetball racket or something like that, or a paintball gun. I'm not asking for anything that dark.
No, here's the thing though. when he's riding a bike inside his campaign office, that doesn't feel real.
No,
it feels like a staged him trying to look like he's calm, chilled out.
Straight
and
up, nobody
a bike.
rides a bike in those clothes.
Of course not.
yeah. No, it's
See, that's not fooling anybody.
No, so when
more
he's
like a segue.
No, I think the Andrew Yin campaign would be more like showing him at 3 a.m. getting up to make a sandwich for his kid.
or that
That's
motherfucker plays
humanizing.
Wii.
Yeah. Oh, really?
He fucking plays Wii.
He does?
I mean, it. I just in my soul.
You can just tell.
But he's trying to pretend he doesn't fucking play Wii.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We need to see that motherfucker playing Wii, because that's when he geeks the fuck out.
Sure.
Yeah.
But he's trying to pretend that's not him.
Yeah, get on
Like, I can
Twitch.
feel it in my soul that Wii is his preferred thing, but he doesn't want to seem like he's not a man, because whatever reason, Wii's for women.
Instead, go get that Fortnite vote. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Get on Twitch.
Exactly.
Get those people, those 15 to 25 people, to go, oh, okay. Now I'm paying attention.
Well, it's just like
Well,
Brianna.
that'll just incise a generation of young people who can't vote for 3 years.
Yeah. Boy.
And then by the time that their political identity is unleashed upon the landscape, watch out.
Yeah.
Because
It'll be like a mutant that's crawled out of the pool.
I mean, did you guys not have
We might need
mock
that.
votes in elementary school though?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
That shit starts in elementary school.
Yeah.
So they already got to start.
Yeah, we were already complaining back in elementary school. George Bush Sr.'s going to win. It doesn't matter what your vote is. He's got
Fucking
this.
Bill Clinton, you got to vote for him. He plays saxophone.
Yeah. He was on Arsenio.
Right,
I mean, what's not to like
exactly.
about that guy? No other president had been on Arsenio.
Nope.
Yeah, so cool.
Kissing black babies.
Yeah. He was the rock star of the DNC, and the DNC that existed.
Okay, look, I just want to say, if anyone was surprised that a rock star was getting a blowjob, they really need to come out from under their fucking rock. Seriously.
Yeah.
Rock stars get blowjobs.
Uh,
Rock stars get blowjobs.
So
This is
have
like-
we passed the point with the Trump thing where has he made it farther in the political spectrum towards this impeachment than Clinton did at this point? He's
No,
further
they're-
along, right?
No, he's
Or
there.
not?
I don't think he's there. Like Clinton made it farther.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
so far.
That's hard
Clinton
to
was
imagine.
acquitted and made some kind of deal where he had to
Well-
like relinquish his license to practice law for some period of time.
This
and
is-
pay a big ass fine.
I was gonna say you still have right wing people who don't understand the impeachment process has started because they don't actually understand impeachment.
Yeah.
These is what I'm saying.
Impeachment is the investigation. The House,
Right.
The House investigation.
They don't have to be removed for it to be impeached, and that's
Yeah.
where you have whole ass adults who don't understand how their own fucking government works. But those motherfuckers can vote,
Yep.
you know. And this is where
that's
those
the-
people don't, because they don't understand the impeachment process has started. They don't understand how dire it is. But this we got to back this shit up because this is the same left wing that tried to destroy not only Monica Lewinsky's
Potential future
character,
everything.
but anybody who accused Bill Clinton of sexual assault. The left wing fucking destroyed them then.
Yeah.
So we gotta back this shit up and be like, hey, there's some fuckery there that we gotta address, and we're not just gonna let the Clinton whatever get away with it. Because I don't know, I doubt Hillary had anything directly to do with that part. But the problem is when you don't fucking divorce the dude and you go down with his ship, then by proxy, she's guilty by association. So yeah, she helped destroy Monica Lewinsky's fucking character. Yeah, she helped destroy, what was it, Paula, and I don't know, I forget the lady's name. But there's a few people who had accused him of sexual assault who came out in support of Monica Lewinsky, who the quote unquote left, they just fucking destroyed their characters.
Yeah.
Then, and this is also at the same time when these quote unquote left wing people destroying Eddie Murphy's career for giving a transvestite a ride, fucking Hugh Grant, that's the dude's name, right?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
For having sex with Divine Brown, just having sex with a prostitute apparently, which I don't know if she was even hooking when they did it. It seemed like, I don't know, whatever. But they destroyed that dude's career for embellishing in carnal desires, shall we call it. There's so many people who... Oh, I just read an article. This dude did a movie where he played a gay dude. Career fucking got destroyed by Hollywood. Hollywood used to destroy they used to destroy, if you had any notion of being gay, your career was done as a man because you can't play fucking quote unquote man roles then. Now Hollywood is the most pushing LGBTQ embracing messages as if they didn't fucking have the worst anti-gay discrimination before. And that's where, to me, I'm like, I was alive. I remember this shit. I remember when people were calling people like Eddie. Okay, and here's the thing. Eddie Murphy used to drop fag like it was no big deal.
Yeah,
He's
that's-
still really
that'll
funny
special
though.
for
He is.
And he
but
also
he
turned into an
changed.
incredible reggae musician. And he there are interviews where he talks about how it's like he's ashamed of himself
yep.
for talking like that.
He was one of the first people to get canceled, one of the first people to publicly change his mind in a way where you're like, oh, he actually thought about the people he was impacting when he was saying that word on stage and making other people laugh at him defining their narrative and him being able to have that experience and grow. He went through the canceling shit before the internet even existed in a way where now he's popular, but I'm looking at it as if Hollywood's trying to make everybody forget they didn't try to fucking cancel him in the
Sure.
first place.
Yeah.
Now they're like, oh yeah, we'll let you be in Shrek. We'll fucking let you be the donkey. We'll let you be fucking Professor Clump. We'll let you play Dolomite is my name. Yeah, we'll let you do that. But remember, we can fucking destroy you.
Sure.
And this
Yeah,
that shit,
implicit threat.
that's where Cat Williams and Martin Lawrence, people are trying to warn us about this shit. Dave Chappelle tried to warn people about this shit. And for what, I mean, obviously Hollywood's machine makes that shit go away. But every time somebody flips out and fucking goes crazy because of what's happening in Hollywood, that shit got pushed off on them. Dave Chappelle was trying to warn people about all the Weinstein shit
Yeah.
in a way before, because Oprah was Weinstein's fucking friend. And this is where it's like, you have Dave Chappelle going on a platform as somebody who's protecting that fucking monster, trying to warn people about it, not able to warn us, because then she'll fucking make him look crazy again, just like she made Tom Cruise look crazy. There's all these things about manipulation of how people are. Nobody gets to define their own narrative, and this is kind of why I think you see when people try to take control of it, it feels like an everyday hero or somebody who's standing up to the machine, when really they're just able to fucking.
The machine lets you stand up.
Right.
Yeah, especially if you leave. I mean, the case of Chappelle, like, he exited for a while. He said, I don't want to do this. Jim Carrey, you know, he reaches a point where he's like, I'm changing as a person. I've been through some stuff. The narrative of me having to go through this tragic situation, very personal situation with someone that I care about, I'm out. And I'll come back when I'm ready.
Except, remember when everybody was sharing that quote-unquote woke speech, and then you find out it was a fucking plant for a movie?
Yeah.
And everybody, I didn't believe that shit in the first place, but everybody who shared that shit as if it was organic should have felt exploited and should have felt taken advantage of. They should have felt manipulated, because this is exactly what happened. They were presented this thing as if it was fucking organic. Meanwhile, they didn't know Jim Carrey was fucking getting paid, getting coached on his side. That whole thing was a fucking state. Like, it was a plant, a media plant, in a way that people who saw the fucking Truman Show in the first place didn't realize was real.
Yeah,
they told you. The fucking Hollywood executives, they laugh at this shit. They made Mad Men. They made the Truman Show. They've been telling us this entire time, none of this shit is fucking real. It's so fake. We're going to make a movie about it. You're going to pay to come see it and laugh at it as if the Truman Show isn't happening all around you. Guess what? You're Truman. You're Truman. Yeah. We're laughing at you. We're monetizing you. We're laughing at you. But you're too dumb to fucking realize it. So we'll make another movie about it.
So just so everyone's aware, recently the United States government raised the cost of expatriating. It used to be $450, and now it is $2,350. So if you want to stop being a United States citizen, it actually costs, as much as a shitty car on Craigslist.
Wow.
Yeah. The bare minimum you have to spend on Craigslist locally in Bloomington, Indiana to get a decent ride that'll last you, 6 months to a year is...
I mean, I don't understand really how there can be a cost. What is it the cost is doing? Is it canceling your membership in the United States? Do you no longer get to go to the wild? What is the process?
Remember that debt we discussed?
Yeah.
Yes. Wow, yeah.
Remember that debt we discussed?
No, I think your debt follows you around, though.
It does, but this is part of that debt.
Yeah.
And this is where it's like, oh shit, you want to get out of this system? We forgot to tell you, you still owe us money. Well, it's not us, but you owe somebody else money.
Yep.
And that's part of that.
Well,
okay.
It costs $2,350 to relinquish association to the United States, meaning the United States Embassy of any country won't recognize who you are. You have no rights in this country. You have no rights as an American citizen in any country that observes the rights of Americans.
Wow.
It's a really dangerous situation.
Yep.
Like, you got to have a place to go that you can become a citizen.
You got to be rich.
You got to be rich. You got to be able to. You've got to be able to. Fend for yourself at some point. And that's kind of terrifying.
Now, there are these people out there, like the story of the digital nomad, right?
Those people are already rich.
Yeah, those people are.
They just don't include that part. They're living off their parents' money.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, as somebody who has lived in another country, they will kick you out with the fucking quickness if you cannot afford to live in another country. Because it's like, you have to get your visa updated, and if you don't have enough money to get that visa, they're gonna kick you the fuck out.
Wow. Yeah.
Quickly. And
So
it's not
travel throughout Europe is actually extremely regulated.
Yep.
There are various zones where you're allowed to land but not leave the airport because it's a transit zone. There are areas in Europe where you're only allowed to land once, and then you have to get off the plane, and then you can only get back on the plane to leave Europe.
Bro, they will, okay, I'll give you an example. I was supposed to go to fucking Sweden, and my passport was going to expire in 6 months. They would not let me on the fucking plane to go. I had no idea until I got to the airport to take off. There's regulations like that they will enforce. They will not let you on the fucking plane.
Man,
they will not let you on the goddamn plane.
How long did they want it to be? for you in that.
It has to be outside of 6 months, or they won't let you in the country because they're assuming you're going to come in to stay over on your fucking passport and get stuck there.
Wow.
So they will not let you in the goddamn... They won't even let you on the fucking plane into the country, let alone past customs.
Man.
Like, you're not going to make it into customs if your shit is not renewed to a certain point. Because then, then they're going to charge you for your whatever 90-day visa. It may be, I don't know what it was. It may have been $50 bucks, $100.
Wow.
I don't know. So you're paying to get that visa in most cases in the first place. But like I said, if your shit is even remotely close to being expired, they're not letting you on that goddamn plane. And I had again, I didn't know, because I'm like, what? I had my return ticket and my shit was gone. Just gone. Because then the issue was, if you have, what I found out then is if you have insurance on the ticket, like say your ticket's $1,200. Well, if you got insurance on it, you're only going to get up to 60 or 80% back. It's not 100, definitely not 100%. But then you have to pay a fee to get that money back. So it may be like $100 or some shit. So if you're anywhere like $500,
wow,
or if your ticket was like $800, you're going to have to pay to get $300 back. And you may not even get the $300. Some shit, where it's like...
Just getting nickel and dimed.
Yeah,
Wow.
and your money's just gone. So there's all these things about when you buy, like insurance on a flight, you think... Because then they'll say, oh, did you miss your flight? Well, you can't reimburse it. That's not on us.
Sure.
It has to be certain... Like, you can't just have missed your flight because you're...
It's got to be like there was some kind of impediment on roadways that no diversion redirection would have gotten you to the airport on time.
Yeah.
Some kind of... And so accidents...
I don't even think that one will work.
I think it does.
Like, in certain cases it may, but if it's like road traffic, I don't know if that one would work in many cases, because it's like, well, they'll be like, oh, well, you should have planned better, even if you're fucking five... Because, like, the one I missed, I was late because of traffic, but they didn't... That was one of the qualifications that they didn't accept. So that's where I was like, in that case, I ended up having to buy a whole new ticket, just lose it. Because that one was to India.
Wow.
Yeah, I've missed an embarrassing number of flights to different countries. Just because it's, this shit out of your control.
Just the bureaucracy of the whole thing.
Well, it's not even just that. Again, there's times where especially if you're flying out of Chicago, sometimes the traffic will stop and you're, fucking 3 miles from the airport and you just cannot move. So there's nothing you can physically do.
Just went to Chicago last week. I had a good time, but once again, that bureaucracy, it felt a lot more like a tourist experience. Went there to see a concert, got to see band Heilung live.
Oh, how was that?
It was transformative. It was a transformative experience. They were designed not to play a collection of songs, but to commit themselves to a ritual.
Yeah.
So that's what they did. A shaman was the first person to enter the stage with a stick of sage, smoke and embers just ringing off of his hands for several minutes, and everyone's kind of looking around nervously.
My understanding is Heilung means healing.
Yeah.
And incidentally, I've read many comparisons calling it some kind of spiritual heavy metal, but there are no guitars, and they use. My understanding is they use Ableton Live and Trigger with MIDI, so it's definitely electronic music. But it's got this Nordic cultural infusion, and there's this really beautiful reverence for, like, I'm not sure where it comes from exactly, but I remember when I first saw their videos, like I think it was Lifa, a live performance.
Yeah.
I just turned this, like, I put all the computers onto the same line and just turned the house on.
Yeah.
and it was incredible. So I can only imagine what it's like to actually be in there, in front of that performance.
I tried to use it. There were a few songs where the way that the rhythm was set up was really beneficial to holotropic breathing, which is something I've been working on.
Ooh, tell us what that
more
is.
time. Holotropic breathing is essentially using the breath to put yourself in a state of mind. So scientifically, they're talking a lot about heart coherence, which is the coherence that exists between the heart and the brain, activating that parasympathetic system. So within the holotropic breathing community, everybody's talking about Wim Hof. He's the man, broken a lot of world records and stuff. And he's using a method of holotropic breathing that is connected to Tumo, which is a Tibetan
Oh, yeah. I've been doing
high
that for a long
elevation
time.
breathing. Yeah, so we have a lot of oxygenation happening in the blood. So using that system, personally, I'm trying to experiment with using it in relation to Kundalini breathing because of the hypoxia. He's focusing a lot on these breath holds, which is affecting that balance, that alkaline balance in the blood. And so with the addition of how the oxygen comes into the body and how the oxygen leaves the body, and even this itself, much like Heilung, is a ritual. How you bring the air in, how you let the air come out. Where is your mind at when you inhale? Where is it at when you exhale? Being conscious of all these separate steps in the process of it. If you happen to have the benefit of being in a live performance with a band that's using percussion and lighting and scent and all these things in a certain way, you can achieve an altered state of consciousness in a totally natural way.
So I think this is actually a good segue to ask, since you practice holotropic breathing, how much of that do you think is the scientific explanation for what Tai Chi is trying to express philosophically?
It absolutely is. I mean, even in the way that they explain the function of the breath in relation to, contraction and retraction, these are elements of the functions of Qi. Qi is energy, and people can sometimes make it something more than it is, but we have a metabolic energy system, we have an electrochemical energy system, and we're having both of those come together, and they are causing an effect. In this case, it's everything that we do, from the speech that we have, and the thoughts that we have, and the way that we feel, the things that happen in our day are all being affected by Qi. Tai Chi is special in a way, and some of this doesn't always get communicated through teachers or even through forms, is special in that you're really dealing with that relationship between expansion and retraction, two elements, and how they're connecting to each other and the space that exists between them. And so it's a really important element to the whole thing. And whether you're doing Tai Chi Chuan for, health, and you're on the beach by yourself doing it the same way a yogi person would, or if you're doing it trying to apply more of the combative principles, it's really the same. Because the contraction and the expansion of the breath and the contraction and expansion of the muscle are related to each other. And being able to figure out how those systems are connected and where you're at and how present you are, being able to quiet down that frontal lobe, go back into the limbic system. So all of those elements really connect together, and that's the moving meditation element of it that probably gets explored more in Baguazhang, but is still there, absolutely, in the Tai Chi Chuan.
So in that, if you were looking at Tai Chi versus Bagua, what would you articulate as if you can express what's happening in your brain, what's the difference between the two, if there is a difference? I'm not sure if there would be, but
Sure.
Since you practice both, what are those two doing to your brain that is different from each other, if there is a difference?
I think it's difficult to explain. I think that it's all essentially circumstantial in a way. It's anecdotal. It can be difficult to quantify. But for example, when I first started doing Tai Chi Chuan, I was filled with peace. My ability to sleep was the first thing I noticed drastically improved. My ability to not be stressed out from external stimulation, to find this center of peace. That took a while to find with the Baguazhang, because the Baguazhang had a lot more movement in it and was constantly putting you in a place where instead of Tai Chi Chuan, it's going to focus more on stability and finding that root and that center. Baguazhang's job is to shake that up, is to put you in a position when you walk the circle, there's always an unevenness. If you do it on flat ground, that's fine. You need to in the beginning. You go out in nature and you
not
try to
flat,
do it.
yeah.
Suddenly, all these tiny little
And the ground
pieces of
moves
information are
and-
coming in through the
yeah.
bottom of the feet, and you're like, oh, okay. And you feel wobbly. So then you're challenging your center. Now, this is also just as true for meditation, right? Maybe you can sit down and have a really profound experience, be very connected with yourself. But then you get to the stop sign. And like, hey, buddy, get out of my way. You lose it. You lose that state of elegance. And so I think that's more the purpose of Bagwazang, is to say, once change comes, once that element breaks into the 10,000 things from the base elements of the yin-yang, once it breaks into all these things, what are you then? Who are you then? Can you still be that person? Whereas Tai Chi Chuan's job is more to find stability and to maintain it regardless of external influence. To try to keep yourself in that place as long as you can be there. And Bagwazang, sometimes they want to challenge that a little bit more. To put yourself in harder places, in more uncomfortable positions, to see if you can reestablish that state from a state of inelegance. So I think those are our two elements. They're connected, and people talk about them as one in a way. Part of that comes down to Sun Lutang, who was the first person to talk about the three families of Tai Chi and Bagwazang and Xingyi. And it's good because it brings people together, makes people train different stuff, and get out of their comfort zone and begin to interact with each other. And that's really important. But at the same time, being able to redistill the elements to maintain the essence of what separates them is also really important.
Yeah. Well, and in framing it that way, I think the way I seem to interpret how the arts evolve, in that if we're establishing families, sometimes there's an art which has an exact opposite in expression that are intrinsically tied together because they negate each other, but they were not necessarily developed together, in that it's something that can form later than having just a direct evolutionary descendants, say, from either an art or from a teacher, in that obviously there's a ton of arts that developed in China, and sometimes they were developed in isolation, relative isolation, and sometimes they were developed in tandem or tangential teaching paths. So I think in that, obviously, everything doesn't have to form in the same way, but when you can have resulting relationships that can come from having the opposite results negate your existence, then I think that's where it's hard not to see things as being together, especially when you're looking from a dualist perspective. But then there's the singular perspective that obviously is not uniquely Western, but when we're trying to articulate individual ideologies or organizations or existences, then you have to say, oh, I practice karate or Jeet Kune Do or this specific Taekwondo, I practice this one art, as if they all don't share a front kick or, a right punch or whatever. There's all these things that they share that, because of individuality as a concept, that we then try to articulate, which art has a different variation that would in some framing be supposed to be superior, but it's really, as you're saying, it's contextual for all these things. And that's kind of where looking at the Bagua approach, that's kind of why I'm asking about what it does to your brain, because I think it's interesting whenever I ask my teachers about real world scenarios, they always think very hard, and it always comes back to situational awareness as being your primary tool.
Sure.
And I've asked multiple teachers, And many, I don't really learn from anyone, I think, who has an unrealistic perspective, and almost all of them have that answer or some variation on that.
I think so, and I think that's a tricky one. Situational awareness is a real complex thing in that once you start to have it, one of the things that does separate Mbagwa is in sparring, at least my experience of this, is being forced to spar 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 people at the same time. Now, it's unrealistic in a sense if all of those people, if their intention is to bring you down to the earth, there's nothing you can really do. It's
Right.
more a meditational principle, and so you're moving at a slower speed. You're using it as the ability to deal with stress and to cite lots of separate pieces of information and to make them coherent.
Yeah.
And this is something you can take into any aspect of your life if it's trained correctly. But situational awareness, if you're looking at it in a technical way, like the OODA loop is a perfect example, observe, orient, decide, and act. It was developed by some Air Force guy. It's an important principle. The military uses it. And essentially, you're just obeying the rules of how the brain works.
What did you call that?
The OODA loop, O-O-D-A.
OODA loop?
Yeah. Observe,
I don't see
orient.
how that's any more serious than look-see-do.
No.
It's not.
No.
It's the same principle,
In
essentially.
fact, it's got an extra step,
Yeah, right.
which John Jones figured out how to remove.
Yes.
Well, that just makes him a genius.
He is. He is.
Yeah.
He is a physical genius.
Yes,
and I think,
physical genius.
clearly in real life he's not in social context, because he does a lot of shit that makes him puts his physical genius into question if he can use it.
Yeah.
And I think he's learned better how to not be so socially inept.
I just hope that people who take OODA loop seriously take look-see-do seriously as well.
Right. Yeah.
Because
But at the same time, I'm convinced the OODA loop is for people who don't have the inherent nature for the look-see-do approach, which I believe is partially genetic, in that
Yes.
this is where we have this forced equality that's actually not accurate to reality, in that we're supposed to be politically correct to say everybody's equal
I
when
feel like-
everybody's not by
I feel
nature.
like if we're gonna have a forced measured equality, it has to be based on the lowest common denominator,
Right.
so we can see who actually excels.
Right, and that the issues with recently
Instead
people
of
who have
having
had
a
the
really high
receipts shown
bar
at
of
the
bullshit.
shopping places. There's been these interesting reports about people who have been complaining that they feel like they're being profiled for who's having to show the receipts before they leave places like
Oh, yeah.
Walmart or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
And profiling as a science, the military uses it, and it's not kind.
No.
It's just based on brutal statistic gathering, intelligence gathering, and then they assess.
And it's all biased. Every
is.
statistic gathering is always biased,
That's
and
right.
that's the problem with even if it's automated, the person who wrote the algorithm has their bias.
Let's
that they
look
put
for
into it.
a specific value, or a specific value coming from this range of this sample, and let's just eventually decide that one of these values is bad arbitrarily at some threshold.
Sure.
And once
And
it
it's
reaches
all-
this threshold, we can say without consequence that there's a problem here.
Yeah.
And anything that we associate with this is bad.
Right. And it's also part of this hypervigilance, and that's I think it's a very exquisitely American problem. It's like a PTSD where we're always just being hypervigilant,
Yeah,
hyper aware of
totally.
potential threats and assessing threats.
But we're not
that's
good at it
something-
either.
No.
And that's the fucked up part is I look at a lot of chatter, I analyze chatter and try to understand, we got to step back and realize for all intents and purposes, we were supposed to have fucking gone to World War III by now based on all these Facebook geniuses analysis of what was happening.
These are the same people that think Civil War II is coming.
Exactly. It's the same people.
Straight up. If they think that they want to start Civil War II while World War III is about to start, really, guys,
That's genius
that's
logic
like-
right there, right?
Yeah, timing's everything. you know.
That's the perfect setup for their Red Dawn fucking
then Red Dawn.
ammo porn fantasy that they want to live out. Because the problem is these people think that they can AK-47 their way out of a Russian invasion, not realizing that if we do have a civil war and then the Russians invade America proper, that everybody's fucked. Everybody's fucked at that point. Not Americans are not winning that. Nobody's winning that shit.
As soon as that happens, I'm pretty sure China just decides to take Russia and the United States.
I mean, but China and Russia would be working together until they stab each other in the back at that point.
I know.
Because that's how shit works.
Yeah.
They'd be like, hey, we can put our shit aside for now. Right now, we can put our shit aside for now. We go fuck these Americans up. Let's come back and then decide if we want to stab each other back later. Yeah. And that's how they do that shit, because that's what they're fucking doing now.
And then the Russians send the Iranians in, and the Chinese send the North Koreans in to assassinate people.
And this is the risk, the game of risk that played out, that all these people in America as leaders never actually played, and they fucking paid somebody else to play.
No. I mean, having played Risk many times, it takes a while, and if you aren't playing with somebody who actually understands how the game is meant to be played, it's not really Risk.
I think I played it once with you. I don't think we saw it was like, I remember it being like a 4-hour, 5-hour
No, it was like
game.
It was like 6 or 7 hours.
Risk.
It was like 6 or 7 hours, and
usually people need to stalemate for it to actually be a Risk, where you just all decide like, hey, we're gonna.
Well, neither of us had
this for now.
I think it was Little George was there too. I think, but I think that he had Australia, and neither of us could.
Oh, that's a huge factor.
Yeah, just powered up Australia.
Neither of us could get to him. Yeah. And so that's when
that's what I'm saying. Yeah. If the right number of people. Usually that's the stalemate is over Australia that prevents either side from taking over. And that's a real game of Risk. Yeah. It usually doesn't end. It's just perpetually border. And that's what you're supposed to learn.
Realistically,
exactly.
whoever takes Australia, if you play it long enough, will win.
Right.
That's
Diplomatically, I think we tried to convince them that Australia doesn't exist. Now, personally, for me, I mean, I technically have not been there. I don't have any physical experience.
Here's my argument for why Australia in Risk is no longer a factor. They aren't allowed to have firearms unless you're like a farmer and have like special permit for it, or in the military. And if Australia's military is like...
You mean the way the Second Amendment was originally written?
Yeah. so if us, I don't think that Australia fits into the whole fantasy anymore.
Yeah,
because they don't have it's all consolidated within their government, organized.
I mean, but that's using the assumption that it's the actual guns that matter and not the coordination. Because ultimately, it's the coordination of the force that usurps the...
Straight up. Like, anyone tries to invade Australia, and they're going to have to contend with, like, a bushload of fucking spears and boomerangs and bull roars and
or fucking coordinated dropping of scorpions and fucking black widows and shit like that. Yeah, good luck trying to sleep when we can fucking drop black widows in your shit.
The Australian ones, which are like bigger.
Right, yeah. Yeah, we don't have to use guns. We can just fucking use our Outback.
Use the Outback.
No troops deployed.
That's how America fucking beat Britain in the first place. Yeah. And this is the problem when Americans don't do their goddamn history homework. Americans did win against Britain, who had bigger army and better guns. They won by using their fucking terrain and understanding how the enemy worked and using their strategy against them.
We can't actually
That's
trust
how we
all
won.
Reporting of casualties from that era as battlefield casualties.
It wasn't even the casualties.
Because probably just like the Civil War, maybe even worse than the Civil War, just as many people would have died from just a similar percentage would have died from scrapes and splinters and bad water and improperly prepared food and all of those things. So
I mean, because ultimately it's not the number of people that died that made us beat Britain. It was our capacity to stall their advancing. Yeah, it doesn't matter how many people died,
and also
that's all it was. We stalled their advances.
They undermined the supply lines.
Yes,
exactly, and that's one of the best ways to stall advances. If you can't fucking feed your troops, they can't keep marching. Mm-hmm. Period. That's one of these things where it's ultimately. There's ways to beat armies that are bigger than you when you're outgunned that you have to employ, as to why the sexuals who don't know the history don't understand how these things actually play out at scale.
What's interesting is that when we learn about American history, there's British military occupation of the United States for a considerable amount of time. And at some point, fighting erupts, and the British leave. And, you know, the British had military occupation for a long time. At what point does history look back upon the period of the 20th century, 21st century, where America starts installing military facilities globally, and maintaining military presence? As
I think you have to also think about it in the sense of those original Americans just thought of themselves as Brits. They probably had accents and shit, and they're fucking low class.
So,
whatever.
I'm glad you mentioned that. There's a language study was released recently where they discovered that the language that we speak now is more similar to the language that was first spoken when people came to the United States. And when people came to the United States and established a new business class, people in England started to soften the R and develop their current accent, because they didn't want to be associated with the rising from the poor British or American business class.
Yeah, because if you go, like, when you hear period accurate British accents to like the early 1800s, they sound like us.
Yep.
And that's where, what was it, Sherlock Holmes? Robert Downey Jr.'s accent sounds bad to an American who doesn't understand the period accents, but it's a perfect fucking British accent for the time.
Yeah.
And it sounds like an American. That's the craziest shit.
Yeah.
Because
that's interesting.
That's
how they used to speak.
Because English as a language is defined by the academic pursuit that develops neologisms.
Yes.
And that process is carried out globally by people who study the language, not just one, college in somewhere in like Sussex or some shit.
Right. Yeah.
So there are hundreds, thousands of departments that are all in pursuit of continual development of this language. And that's
I've always been interested by that, the especially with British actors who have a certain kind of Americana that they create when they portray American characters that always kind of sounds just a little to me like something from a 1940s serial drama, just on a very subtle level.
I think that's we're witnessing the fetishization of American culture.
Yeah.
I don't know, and it's really weird.
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to be the ones that fetishize other cultures, even English culture, and so I think it's one of those, like, it's kind of fun. It's one of those mirror moments. When it's like, wait, they're putting the light on us. Oh shit.
And I get fooled a lot. I remember I saw the first few seasons of Sons of Anarchy. It got a little too dark for me, but I did enjoy it, and I didn't know that Charlie Hunnam was English, and then I heard his actual accent. I was like, now I get it.
That's funny.
I had a
Now I
similar
see.
experience with House.
Right.
So the whole time I think it's just like this guy's just got a really weird accent and all that stuff. And there's one episode where he calls a doctor in England and uses his real voice, and it was incredible. Like, and at that point, I mean, it never occurred to me. So I go look up Hugh Laurie, of course, and it's like, wait, that's actually his voice. And I like go back and like loop the phone call on the show, and it's like, wait a second, holy crap, that's awesome.
Well, I feel
Nice
like
time.
Hollywood is playing a practical joke on Americans when they do that shit, because they'll cast somebody like Henry Cavill as the quintessential American, as Superman.
Yeah.
When we haven't heard him in American media for the first time, and then like, oh, by the way, he's British. You thought he was American, like Tom Hardy.
Yeah.
People in America are like, yeah, he's a quintessential cowboy, and that was a real American man. Not knowing he's like a bisexual British dude.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's a real hetero American hero. There was
That's the fucks anything is manly like type shit, right?
well, they don't know he's bisexual when they're saying that. Is what I'm saying is because he played a cowboy in a movie. They don't know he's like a British dude. They think because he played one in a movie that's him.
I mean, like,
They're that literal.
I mean, that's like taking cosplay to a different level there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's again, it's these people who grew up believing in Santa Claus and white Jesus.
I mean,
thinking that the
so-
white hetero male that they believe
They know
in,
that the actress
like,
that portrays Supergirl isn't actually Supergirl, right?
not in their heads, man, or like
God.
they didn't, you know.
Also, big shout out because she plays Chronic in Blunt Man v Chronic in the Kevin Smith in the Jane Silent Bob reboot, which is
They had
which is hilarious.
I
Is that
saw
out?
It is hilarious.
Nice.
It's so
they had the
good.
dude that plays Coral Docs on there too.
Yeah,
I haven't seen the movie, but I saw a screenshot. I was like, oh, it's fucking brainy.
yeah. they get like it's like a start. Well, it's got a lot of people whose names you'll recognize and faces you'll recognize, and he does a lot of very, very select heart and soul string tugs throughout the movie. They're really subtle, and they kind of build up on you. It's good stuff.
Well, I haven't really been able to get into Kevin Smith films since.
It's more of a Jay and Silent Bob movie than like a Kevin Smith film.
I mean, but even Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, it didn't feel like a Kevin Smith film. It felt like he was trying to be somebody else, and that's where.
I think I've even heard him say something similar to that.
Yeah.
Really?
that
Yeah, I'm not
expression.
surprised.
I think the Jay and Silent Bob movies are like they reflect part of him and like Jason Mewes that doesn't translate into the other movies.
And I think he grew up in a way where I feel like I never saw it, but I feel like Tusk is him now. Like he's not a comedy maker anymore. Like he's lived enough and seen enough where he can't make those movies, but he's trying to make them because people grew up seeing him and he's trying to pay fan service. So like, yeah, Clerks 3 needs to be dark. It can't be all comedy. It has to be like super dark.
No,
you know what I mean?
This is a very interesting movie because it not only is it self-referential, but it at times breaks the fourth wall to ensure that you recognize how self-referential it is. It's a reboot, and then they explain the process of rebooting a movie and how it's different from a remake. And then, so it's kind of got this weird meta context to it.
But I feel like he's stuck in that.
And so the reason that's amusing is the exact reason you just said is that he keeps making the same movie. and so because we're in this era of reboots and remakes, it makes sense that they
did that.
they reboot a 20-year-old movie and changed enough of the details that it's fun.
He plays with that.
That's good.
That's good. I feel like that's him breaking out of it because I feel like he could have a second part of his career that's really good movies because now he has notoriety, but also he has a new medium because I think he's been limiting himself.
I think he and Adam Sandler need to make a movie together.
Oh, that would be a world colliding.
I think him and Seth MacFarlane.
I think they need to
definitely. They need to make like a Star Trek that's not meant to be a comedy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I think that's what they're at their points in their lives and careers where I think that the jokes should supplement the darkness and not try to hide one for the sake of the other. Because
that's a sophisticated humor, and we don't see that a lot nowadays.
Well, do you remember Cable Guy?
Oh wow, yeah.
That's what he was trying to do, but people didn't get it, and it's like that shit it's fucked up.
Yeah,
it's like there's a reality to it where you're like, oh my god, this dude exists out there, and you kind of have to like laugh about the shit that he does.
It was a horror movie that had dark comedic aspects to it, but at its core, it was a movie about a stalker.
Yeah, exactly.
A crazy stalker, not just a crazy stalker, but one with like Jim Carrey supernatural abilities.
And I don't think they pitched it wrong because if they had pitched it like that, it would have been more how what was it 24 Hours, whichever that one with Robin Williams where he was the photo developer.
Oh right, yeah.
24-hour photo.
Yeah.
That one I think they framed correctly, so then we understood that
it's interesting.
It's supposed to be a horror film.
I think that we want to remember Robin Williams as like this, a purely comedic genius, but he did so many other movies that like in the thriller genre that the guy was just super talented.
Yeah, the razor's edge between comedy and tragedy.
Yeah, well, it's just there are times when I think about like actors that we associate solely with like a comedic role or an action role or whatever it is. People get stuck in these characters, for some reason Tom Cruise is the Mission Impossible guy now.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
because he has a lot of fun making those movies and he wants to keep making that franchise. But somehow he got to do that. And
Well, he's
then-
like a white Jackie Chan almost.
yeah,
when he does that,
and he likes to do his own stunts, and that's cool.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But then there are guys like John Cena who are built like brick shithouses. And as I watched this movie where he was like a smoke jumper and dealing with kids, and John Leguizamo is in it, and so it's a comedy.
Oh.
And I enjoyed the shit out of it because here's this big beefcake dude who's can pick up trees and shit, like getting beat up by little kids.
Well, I think The Rock.
Hilarious.
Well, even Hulk Hogan.
They all do something like that at some point.
They laid the groundwork for that in that. I think WWF was obviously acting in the first place.
Yeah.
But when it's basically theater for dudes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
dudes don't want to accept it as opera or
Sure,
fucking
Soap opera, yeah.
soap
Oh no!
opera.
Like WWF as a kid, and reading about the naming issue that nobody seemed to look
Right,
up. It was
yeah.
on national television for decades, and,
Yeah.
and nobody noticed it. That's the disparity.
I'm glad
between the overlap of
WWF
those
got
cultures.
Wow.
I'm glad they got their copyright back, but I still am gonna call it WWF forever. I don't give a fuck about the WWE.
Yeah,
That's,
WWE is
not
like
my shit.
that's like
That's-
the weirdest concessions. Like seriously,
Yeah.
fight that shit. You're wrestlers. You're supposed to fucking fight that shit.
Right.
Yeah. Make it difficult. Make it messy.
Yeah, these are our modern gladiators of sorts.
Or
And
just pay fucking.
just pay the.
Yeah, if they they could have made
Vince
it
McMahon
a
had plenty of
thousand times
money.
better if they were like, hey, for every dollar that comes in WWF, we're gonna send an actual $50 to the World Wildlife Federation
Yeah.
or whatever.
Ooh, that's a nice move.
Yeah.
That would have been good.
Vince
Yeah,
McMahon would be
you know?
writing off like
And they'd
on
still
his
be
taxes till the end of
WWF.
time.
Yeah.
As if the WWF is gonna say no to that shit.
Yeah, no.
You know?
Do it for the animals.
Yeah. Oh, that would have been so great if there'd have been a generation of like Macho Man, Randy Savage, and Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan commercials on PSAs about saving wild-
animals.
Yeah.
Right. How different would the world be now?
Oh,
Wow.
the place would be so much cooler.
Little shit like that is how you get a
Rhinos wouldn't
completely
be
alternate universe.
Rhinos wouldn't be
man.
gone. Koalas wouldn't be going away.
Right.
Like,
yeah, that shit would not have happened.
oh man.
That
We'll just try to
universe.
imagine a multiverse theory that there is an Earth out there somewhere.
It has to
we don't
be.
have to
got it
imagine
done.
one. It
Yeah,
exists out there
exactly.
somewhere.
We're
It's
just
there.
We're just channeling some shit where we're like, oh, we saw the light in the darkest universe. We saw it. The portal opened up for a second. Fucking somebody get the time stone. Rewind that shit.
Exceptional radio. Exceptional radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.